Welcome to the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. My name is Shannon Boucher. I'm here with my co-host Melanie Bennett. I have a new microphone today. I'm really excited about it. Officially podcast now that I have a Blue Yeti. We've had a busy week as always in the Canadian Gender Wars Report. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the Amy Hamm hearings, which wrapped this week after that whole thing spanned about 3 years. A Twitter friend and also someone who overlaps in some groups that I'm in, who goes by @JustDad7, who's a retired lawyer, put up some notes about announcement from Canada's Minister of Health and a systematic evidentiary review on trans healthcare. There was a Genspect conference in Denver, Colorado. We interviewed a common friend and fellow warrior in the gender wars, Marie Picard. I had a conversation with her. There's some rumors about a leak from WPATH and some research that's being done by Michael Schellenberger and Mia Ashton that we're going to talk about. And we had good news coming out of Alberta while we were recording our podcast last week, and Pierre Poilievre made a statement. There's lots to cover in this week's weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report, and I'm going to hand it over to Melanie.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
To talk about our sponsors.
Well, I'm going to do my best today. You know, we do post this on Woke Watch Canada, which is a Substack, and they have fantastic articles by several different authors about all kinds of other, not just gender topics, but other woke topics, anti-racism, post-colonial theory, what have you. So I do highly recommend that you go and have a look at them. And there's The Resilience, my own podcast outside of this podcast. Next week, we have Maxim Bernier, who's going to be joining me for a shorter discussion. So yeah, go check out my other YouTube channel. It's called The Resilience, and it's with Our Duty Canada, which is, I don't often talk about them here, but it's a support organization for parents of families who've been affected by gender ideology. So if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. We put out a video every week, and it's the same with The Resilience. Please like and subscribe.
Yeah, I want to thank all of our new subscribers. We had a big surge in subscribers over the month of October. And a lot of people obviously very interested in the Amy Hamm hearings that I covered through live tweeting over the last couple of weeks. And I did continue to do that this week as well. So thanks for, checking out our conversations about what's going on in the Canadian Gender Wars. And we're going to launch in today. What do we have up first?
Up first, I would like to talk about the Genspect Conference. So as you mentioned, Our friend Marie Picard had the opportunity to attend Genspect Conference. And let's play the video.
I'm here with Marie Picard. Marie and I have known each other through gender critical parent activism for a little while. It's nice to have you on the show, Marie.
Thank you, Shannon.
The reason I wanted to talk to you was you came back a couple of days ago from the Genspect Conference in Denver, in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get some Canadian insight into what that conference is. First of all, can you share a little bit about, lots of us want to protect our privacy in the work that we're doing. Can you share a little bit about yourself and how, what brought you to this issue?
Sure. So I have a long interest in autistic people. It's something that started when I was a kid. So it's been one of my special interests, I guess. And so there's a lot of autism in my family. And as a lot of people tend to go for the trans identity in droves these days, So I had a couple of kids in my family who started identifying as trans, and then over some time started looking into it. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to get involved to try to help these people kind of get through their gender dysphoria and come out the other side non-medicalized. That's basically what I'm trying to do. So going to Genspect Conference was part of that. It was kind of the next step, meet other clinicians and professionals that are working on this and try to help and learn more.
Terrific. Can you tell viewers who might not know a lot about Genspect a little bit about the organization?
Sure. So it's an organization that's international. It's present kind of in the Anglosphere. It was started mostly by clinicians in the field of psychology. Some of them were counselor or psychotherapists for young people, and kind of saw the trans wave hit some of their clients and got alarmed and decided to try to help as well. So it's a fairly large organization at this point. There's a lot of people involved from different fields. Some researchers, some ex-researchers, people who have clinical practices, people who don't. There's also some journalists involved, people who have written books about the topic, and there's some detransitioners that are there.
Yeah.
So it's a big scope of people trying to work together on the issue.
And international, right?
This is their logo. It's going to be backwards, but this is Genspect.
So how many people at the conference? Give a sense of size. And there was
really bad at guessing sizes. I was thinking maybe 1,000, but I could
Holy cow.
I could be wrong on that. It was hard to tell because we were all sitting in around tables.
Yeah.
So at no point did I see the group kind of all standing together to get the real scope. So yeah, hard to say. Probably less than 1,000 for sure, but
yes, it was a good turnout. There was some cloak and dagger stuff going on too, wasn't there? Like you didn't find out where you were going to be until the last minute.
Yeah, and pretty high security too. Like we all got scanned on the way in, and yeah, we all got the email the day before, basically telling us where it was. Yeah.
Wow, and that obviously for security reasons, protesters and trans activists and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and we got no protesters, so that was pretty good. And I would assume a good portion of people knew where it was ahead of time, just the people that are involved. And a lot of us stayed at the hotel where it was taking place. So there was some people who knew, where it was going to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was good. Nobody showed up to protest. So.
And what was the overall purpose of this? Genspect has done like a Detransitioner Day of Awareness before a couple of times. They've had a couple smaller conferences, nothing of this scale.
Well, it was very American. It was it was a little showy, but in a good way. It wasn't over the top, but they brought out the big guns, I think, for this conference. So WPATH is the World Transgender Health. I can't remember what the
World Professional Association of Transgender Health.
Transgender Health, yeah. Yeah, so they're kind of self-appointed international authority on how to approach the gender dysphoria issue, and they've been around since the 60s. So far, there hasn't been really any alternative, and so Genspect is trying to bring in a new approach. So what they did since April of this year is the first time they did it. So they're piggybacking on WPATH conference, going to the same place, same time. To show an alternative in the same place, and inviting all the people that are going to WPATH to come to the Genspect conference to see a different perspective.
Wow.
So yeah, so they did Killarney in April, and then the last weekend was Denver, Colorado.
That putting an alternative to WPATH forward.
Yes, yeah, that's the whole idea.
Yeah, and I understand there was some actual new tabling of let's call it work product, or efforts by members of Genspect that were released at the conference. Is that right?
Yeah, so they brought out a draft for the gender care framework. So they're not calling it standards of care like WPATH calls their manual, because standards of care requires that there's been a lot of research and there's evidence backing your standards of care. And what Genspect is trying to say is there isn't enough research to know exactly what is going on here, but we would like to have a non-medicalized approach. So they're calling it the gender care framework instead of standards of care. And if this can be implemented, or at least accepted that we can even do it, then maybe there can be some clinical trials in the future to really give it the backbone. But right now, it's really people going on old studies, showing that a lot of kids grow out of it, and just a lot of experience. A lot of these clinicians that put this together have experience with, different age groups of transgender identified people. So they call it the gender care framework, which I think is pretty good.
Now, I imagine this was in collaboration with GETA, because I heard that, okay, so GETA stands
for overlaps in members, yes.
Yeah, so GETA, for viewers, is Gender Exploratory Therapy Association. It was co-founded by Stella O'Malley, who was a founder of Genspect, and Lisa Marciano, a Jungian analyst from Philadelphia. I think she's from
I'm
there.
not sure where she's from. She's American, yeah.
And Sasha Ayad, who I believe is from Texas. I may be wrong there. So parallel institutions.
Yeah, so all three of them were at the all three of them were there at the conference. So there's a lot of overlap between the groups, as well as SEGM, which is the more that one is only people in the medical world, I guess.
Yeah, and some researchers as well. SEGM, again, for viewers, there's lots of acronyms in this world. SEGM is Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. We have a Canadian contingent of SEGM. They're mostly as you said, the researchers and scientists and medical professionals. And so, like, I guess everyone was there. Now, the Canadian contingent, there's some work by another Canadian organization, Canadian Gender Report, that you've been involved with. What's the news from them?
So there were different groups that came together to put together this document, which is supporting gender questioning students in Canadian schools. And that's been released and printed already, but Genspect was involved, the LGBTQ Courage Coalition, SEGM was involved, ended up writing the document at the end where they're all Canadians. And all I'm doing for it right now is translating, because the document's already written, it's already been done, someone's done all the work. I'm just translating it to French and trying to get it done before the Quebec inquiry starts at the end of the year.
Well, that's a lot of work. I understand it's a pretty comprehensive document.
It's long, but I'm picking away at it. Luckily, I had lots of time, so going well. Yeah.
What were the highlights for you from the conference? And can you maybe highlight, while you're discussing some of the Canadian contingent that was there? And
so as far, there's probably under a dozen Canadians, not a ton. People from different avenues. There were a couple of parents. There was Michelle, the Detransitioner that we both know, lovely Michelle. There was, I'm trying to think. Oh, Coach Linda Blade, of course. She was actually a speaker there. And
she had a busy couple of days.
Yeah, so she was kind of our Canadian representative there on the stage, and she did talk about the things that are happening in Alberta, the things that were just announced, I think, the day before the conference, just some of the changes that are going to be brought in there. So, it was great to have her there.
Anyone you come across that was really a highlight for you?
Every speaker kind of had a different piece of the puzzle. I think Genspect did a really good job at kind of bringing in, I mean, it was called the bigger picture, right? So I think they did a really good job at just coming in from every angle, looking at different ways that people come to be involved in the gender discourse, There was some talk more about biology. Some presenters were covering more the psychology side. There was, some stats. The last talk was Detransition Time Bomb, and that was Wilfred Reiley that did that one. And I thought that was pretty interesting. He kind of goes through it's hard to get hard data on how many people have transitioned and how many have detransitioned, because the clinics are not being forthcoming to the request from governments that are asking this, or from private citizens that are asking these questions. So they're kind of using data online, on social media, on Reddit, to try to guess, how many people are actually detransitioning.
Yeah.
And in the end, it seemed like there was a hard 30,000 for sure. And that's missing a lot of people that just never went back to the clinics, that just aren't involved online. So that's a lot of people.
So what was his conclusion? I mean, obviously, a lot of us have been thinking about this for a while, especially people whose families are affected, like yours and mine. What do we think the outcome is there? Did Reiley give any impressions? Besides the numbers, what does this mean?
Yeah, well, he compared it to the lobotomy medical scandal, which had 10,000 lobotomies performed in all the years that it was due. So this is way bigger. So kind of put it in perspective for me, because I really didn't know about the numbers of lobotomies. I mean, everyone's thinking the same thing. There's going to be a lot of lawsuits. There's going to be a ton of lawsuits. As soon as you have a few that go through, it's just going to be, well, we call it a time bomb. It's just going to be kind of a big flood of it.
And I heard rumors, maybe it was from you, that there was another or perhaps more Canadian detransitioners that are beginning legal processes. Do we know anything about that, or is it just?
I think there's one more. I'm not sure who they are, where, or what any of the details are.
What's coming up for you in the next year or so? Are you, as you're looking forward, where's your energy going? And
well, I'm hoping to get involved in the gender care framework with my physical therapy. So when I was in Denver, there was some discussions about that with different people, and a lot of the reaction I got was, well, of course, or that's a great idea. There was always like, everyone sees it as kind of the obvious thing that should be in there for autistic people.
Well, thanks for chatting with me today, Marie, and giving us some insights into Genspect and the conference that you attended, and about the work that you're doing. It's great to see you as always, and look forward to getting more. We'll post some information about that school and education policy framework that Canadian Gender Report has been working on, and Marie is translating for the Quebec contingent. And look forward to seeing
if anyone wants to see the gender care framework, it's available on the Genspect website. So you can actually get the PDF there. It's a big document, but if anyone wants to have a look, it's there. Yeah.
Terrific. All right. Thanks for joining us today, Marie. I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Shannon.
So, I mean, that was great to hear from Marie. She really is. She's in physical therapy and massage therapy, and she really has a grounded sense and presence about her. It was great to hear about her experience at WPATH, and there's also some things that we're hearing from the rumor mill.
Well, before we move on, actually, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. First of all, I did mention the resilience. I actually did a long form conversation with Marie in person, my only in person conversation on the resilience with her, and she goes into a lot more detail about her approach to the therapy and her understanding of autism and how that relates to trans. So if you're interested in that, it's on the Resilience podcast. But the other thing I wanted to mention, I noticed in there was one thing that I think was missed out is the slide from Christina Buttons at the conference. Apparently received a standing ovation, where she basically points out that no child or adult can possibly consent to any kind of therapy or medical treatment or surgery if they're not fully if they're not fully advised on that, on what that might entail. So that's an interesting thing that was missed out there that I just wanted to add on to it before we moved on.
All kinds of holes in the affirmative model, right? Affirmative care model. And we really do need an investigation in Canada into how that works. I had the opportunity to speak with Just Dad 7 this week. I was actually in a Zoom meeting with him and a few others on Thursday night. And the conversation amongst this group of, medical professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, Marie was in that conversation. We have a few lawyers there as well, is how do we get that systematic evidentiary review? How do we get back to, instead of just affirmative model, which means give people whatever they want based on their own self-diagnosis. So, kind of regardless of age at this point, someone goes into the gender care clinic and they say, I'm born in the wrong body. And then, half an hour later, they've got a prescription for hormones or puberty blockers, which is quite terrifying. And unfortunately, Canada's health minister this week, Mark Holland, I'll just read from Just Dad's tweets, has tabled a response, or rather a non-response, to a petition calling for Canada to conduct a systematic review of gender medicine in young people, which shows a willful ignorance to the issues. His tweet thread was 7 or 8 tweets long. The petition refers to the systematic reviews conducted in Finland, Sweden, and the United Kingdom, which have led to major changes to that affirming care model, but the response completely ignores the developments in Europe and around the world.
Speaking of that, there is a paper out this week, I believe it was the 9th of November, although I could be slightly wrong here, from the Australasian Psychiatry. And this paper describes the ethics on gender affirmative care. And it does point out, and I think although it's Australia, I think it's interesting that this paper points out the timeline of gender affirming care and that it has been increasing despite the fact that the positive outcomes have not necessarily been seen. And it also points out that European countries that have pioneered a lot of this, so the Dutch protocol, for example, right, which is what the WPATH and all the other people sort of latched onto. She points out that European countries like the UK and Denmark decided, I think in Finland as well, decided no longer to do this or to put a halt on it because they were not seeing the positive benefits that they were told that would exist. And so the reason I'm talking about this paper is Canada is still saying that this is the right course of action, despite the fact that systematic evidentiary review in Europe says this is not the right thing to be doing. And your tweet mentioned that, was it a press release by the Parliament? I think it was a press release. I don't know what they're called officially.
Yeah.
But the point is it basically goes on to say that Canada supports its decision to follow WPATH guidelines. It also goes on to say that it will not change its position, that it does not support evidentiary review, and that it said at the end that every Canadian has the right to live as their authentic selves. And yet Australia managed to publish a paper, and that's one of the countries that has been most on board with this, but still managed to publish a paper saying, guys, this is a bad idea. Everyone's saying this is a bad idea. There's no evidence. And yet Canada, or at least the federal government, has been holding fast.
Oh, well, I mean, it's kind of one thing for, the Australasian Journal to be publishing this, but there's other stuff going on in Australia. Australia, kind of like Canada and kind of like the US, is one of the outliers in this model of care, and is very affirming. If I'm not mistaken, there was I think it was the head of a clinic or like a department of a hospital who had spoken out this past week, and they were punted from their role because they were speaking out against the affirmation model. So they have some of the institutional capture issues, just like we have in Canada, and the administrative state, as as some people are referring to it. Basically, these mid-level bureaucracies are controlling policies and processes and procedures, and exercising punitive measures against people who question them. So it doesn't seem to matter in some places like Canada. If there's evidence to the contrary, where the administrative state is still going to push forward the agenda there.
But there's a conflict here, because I remember not too long ago, Quebec, as a province, stated that they wish to have a systematic review of the evidence. Now, I don't know what's happened with that so far. I haven't heard further news, but that came out not long ago. And as a province, saying that, our federal government is now saying, no, we don't want a review. We don't want a review. What is that saying? I'm just not sure how to take that.
Yeah, well, I don't know either. I just we're not at the level of scandal yet, and I don't think we're going to get that systematic review at a federal level until after we have a change in government. There's just no political will, and just like everything else, I voted Liberal for 30 years. I haven't voted for a Conservative since I think 1991 or 1992, when Kim Campbell was the head of the Conservative Party. Voted Liberal for my whole adult life, and I just can't fathom what the approaches that the Liberals are taking. They seem to be worse than the Conservatives in the last tenure under Stephen Harper, just mired in scandal after scandal, and an absolute refusal to do anything to self-analyze and course correct.
So as somebody, technically my passport says I'm Canadian, but treat me as someone who has no idea. But yes, I still don't fully understand the Canadian political system. If a province is saying we want a systematic review, what effect does it have that the federal government is saying we don't want a systematic review? Because are they even responding to Quebec? Like, that's the bit that I didn't understand. It seems to be independent. Can they actually stop the province from conducting their own?
No. So healthcare is partly paid for by federal tax dollars that are given to the provinces to administer health. So each province has its own health authority. In Ontario, it's OHIP, Ontario Health Insurance Plan, and all the doctors who are on the in the province are paid for through this. What's the right? Why is the name escaping me? The social,
like an insurance,
the socialized medicine that we have, universal healthcare.
Yeah.
And so each province has their own health authorities and ability to make their own decisions. So I can't see that if a province wants to undertake a systematic evidentiary review, that the federal government can have anything to say about it. Although in other areas there seem to be real erosions, and there's some stuff happening this week about the federal government giving money directly to municipalities and skipping the province, cutting the province out of the those levels of relationship. Well,
it just begs the question why they're even. It just seems suspicious to me, because that's what I thought. I thought they were different, so it seemed oddly suspicious to me why they would suddenly come out with this. What seemed to me like some kind of press release saying we're not going to conduct an evidentiary review. Nobody asked the federal government for that. Not that I'm aware of anyway, but that's that.
It looked like there might have been a petition.
Was there?
Which I've just clicked on to see what petition to the government of Canada. The incidence of gender dysphoria has been increasing rapidly in Canada, particularly in youth and young adults without prior history of gender dysphoria. And so this petition was made in September, and it was sponsored by Larry Maguire from Brandon-Souris, Conservative Caucus of Manitoba. It just wasn't promoted. 103 signatures. So it's a shame that it didn't get.
They responded to a petition of 103 signatures.
So maybe that's why that didn't get as much traction, because if we had known about this, I don't know, like
Well, that's curious enough because they won't respond to, multiple thousand signatures. So that's curious that they would respond to this one petition of 103 signatures. But that's me just putting my tinfoil hat on. I feel like there's damage control here because it seems pretty reasonable to me saying that there is an increase in trans-identifying youth that never presented with any issues before. Then all of a sudden they're trans, and that's a bit odd. Can't we review this? And the government is saying, there's nothing wrong here. There's nothing wrong here.
It may be before September 20th and before the Million March conversation and the parents' rights movement really lit up here in Canada from June and through September. There really wasn't any response from any federal or provincial authorities. Blaine Higgs was the first elected official in Canada to raise questions about gender policies in education. But that kind of was the beginning of the dam bursting, as far as I'm concerned. Like, look, we could find someone to sponsor a similar petition and ask every one of our viewers, and we could have 5 times as many signatures on a petition in a couple of days as this was able to garner. I have no idea what genius promoted this. It just didn't get any traction, sadly.
Around that time would have been very popular with the marches. That's true.
Yeah.
But speaking of politics, on the topic of politics, there's a couple political things that have been going on, like you mentioned in the introduction. Do you want to start with the UCP convention?
Yeah, well, really,
in Alberta.
Really exciting news. Last week, while we were recording, or just before, Danielle Smith had given her speech to the convention, and in the speech received a standing ovation for saying that parents had a right to be parents and to raise their kids according to their values. Now, CBC put up a piece, and I don't, sometimes I have concerns about CBC, but CBC is reporting that Alberta's premier leads a party whose most active members almost unanimously want the province to refuse to house trans women in women's prisons, and to require schools to tell parents if their child wants to secretly change their pronouns, as New Brunswick and Saskatchewan have controversially done. This is all, I love this language.
Is it controversial? Is it really
right?
Controversial?
I've spent some years in media and language studies, and there's a guy that I really appreciate. I may have mentioned him here on the podcast before, named S.I. Hayakawa. He was a Japanese-Canadian journalism professor and journalist in the 1930s and 40s. And he wrote a book called Language and Thought in Action. It's an excellent book if you haven't read it, because it was written in response to the kind of, really propagandistic environment of the 20s and 30s. We were at the tail end of what's called yellow journalism, which was this like sensationalist journalism between Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, and they were trying to out-sensationalize each other in the newspapers in order to sell papers. And it got to the point where apparently there was, I think it was in Cuba, there was some sort of skirmish, and Hearst sent somebody there to take pictures of the war. And the photographer got there and was like, there's no war. And he's like, well, you give me pictures that look like a war and I'll give you the war. And so like there was this bizarre relationship between the media and the public and who's wagging the dog and that sort of thing. And anyway, Hayakawa, it always sticks with me, talked about how media uses snarl words and purr words. And, the snarl words are these emotionally engaging, they provoke outrage and anger and
like transphobic,
hatred.
perchance.
Sure. So we have, just the province's refusal to house trans women in women's prison. No, we're talking about men who identify as women. We're talking about refusing to house men in women's prisons. But this manipulation of language is just, I mean, we've gone back to the same place. Lots of people have been commenting as the 1930s in terms of our media environment. Now, the UCP also voted unanimously to eradicate diversity and inclusion offices at universities and colleges, ban safe drug consumption sites. Here's another misleading term safe drug consumption sites, because the opioid epidemic. Adam Zivo from the National Post has written excellent pieces about this, and Aaron Gunn has done a couple of documentaries on the opioid crisis and this so-called safe supply issue. Um, so there's some good stuff coming out of Alberta. Not surprising on the safe supply stuff, um, because that was part of the platform before, and I've heard Danielle Smith speak about that. But it really is encouraging to hear her finally talk about the gender issue in schools and in education and in pronouns, and then to be able to say, look, no males in women's jails.
On a side note, speaking of safe supply and all that, did you see the CBC article that suggested that Canada was thinking about banning tobacco?
Sorry, almost got coffee out of my nose there. Yeah.
Because my understanding here in Canada is that we want all drugs to be legal. And yet there's some mutterings about making cigarettes illegal. Like the UK just banned it for everyone under 14, but they don't have they don't have all legalized drugs in the UK, but here we do in Canada.
Well,
so anyway, that's a little side note.
I guess BC is the test jurisdiction for that, where they basically decriminalized everything. The hard drugs, the heroin, the cocaine, the fentanyl, all.
But imagine imagine, it's okay to buy heroin at a safe supply store, a shop, because I know there are shops in British Columbia, but you can't buy cigarettes.
Yeah. Well, safe supply comes.
It's just beyond
safe supply comes from pharmacies. It straight from your Shoppers Drug Mart, and your out west, it's London Drugs and private pharmacies, and they have the ability. They have a process where an addict is vetted, and they're given a prescription. Anyway, we're a little bit off the gender topic, but
Well, I just wanted to say, I think the expression is Canada is not a serious country at this point.
No.
So Pierre Poilievre made a statement in Richmond Hill, which went viral all over the internet, essentially stating his strongest point on what he calls radical gender ideology.
Yep.
So let's play that clip.
Does not have a right to impose his radical gender ideology on our kids and on our
Well, that's a positive sign.
Short and sweet, right? Just there it is. Trudeau doesn't have the right to impose his radical gender ideology on our kids. Overdue, but not surprising.
And it's interesting too, because Lecce, I think it was actually last week, put out a tweet saying that we needed to teach children about the harms of communism and Marxism. So again, these are statements. They're not, there's no laws being put into place. There's no policies being put forward. There's not that. There's statements. So I don't know. We'll see how that develops, but certainly a positive sign.
I think it's positive, and we can see right away there was some slice and dice going on from the Liberal sort of campaign machinery about Pierre Poilievre. And I've talked to Chris Elston, Billboard Chris, about this a bunch of times. And he has very little faith in mainstream political parties, and he said, I don't know, in the last 10 days or so, Poilievre has still never said anything about it. He's never going to say anything about it. And, you can count on him to do nothing. And then to his credit, after this video came out, he said, okay, yes, he said it. It's a good first step. We need to see more. I agree with him. But the Liberals jumped on this. And right. And I think this is part of the reason why they don't want the systematic evidence review. They don't want to point to their own shortcomings and gross failures. They want to weaponize these snarl words, like I was talking about, and make Poilievre seem like they're going to try and use the language, the hateful bigot, the transphobe, the intolerance, the U.S. style politics importing from the US, blah, 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 without saying, hey, wait a second, maybe the gender ideology that we imported from the US and these US organizations into Canada and allowed the activists to write the policies are what's actually caused the problem. And this is just a response. It's great to hear Poilievre speak out about this, but when I was at the Canada Strong and Free conference here in Ottawa, which is as close, but it's pretty close to the Conservative National Conference in terms of the people there, Pierre Poilievre spoke. And we also got some strategy from in a town hall with former Prime Minister Stephen Harper and Preston Manning. And this was in, I want to say, April, late March. And they outlined some strategy about preparing for the election. And this is why I believe that Poilievre has been quiet on this for so long, is that their strategic focus was to focus on the Liberals and their issues. The opposition's job is to be the opposition. It's not to table a platform right now. When the election gets called, as we understood at the conference, that's when the policy platform is going to come out, when they're going to release. But in the meantime, the opposition's job is to call to account the government.
Well, that's really interesting, because I also think this relates to Amy Hamm, which is our next topic. Mm-hmm. Amy Hamm, last week we discussed how she mentioned she believed that no debate is a tactic, or snarl words
yeah.
is no debate. And no debate really is, we don't want to discuss this, because if we discuss it, reasonable people will understand that this is completely ridiculous, right? Which is, I would say, kind of what you're describing,
yeah.
really. And that's what she was saying in the hearing last week. So speaking of the hearing,
I want to pull up, oh, come on, one of her great tweets. Good, she's got it pinned. Okay, so there were great moments in this hearing. So we, if I remember correctly, and I have to go back to my thread, I think that Amy, that's right, last Friday, she took the stand and she went through most of her direct examination with Lisa Bildy. That means giving her testimony. And Lisa Bildy did a terrific job in giving Amy the questions to guide her through a narrative, and covered all the major different areas that, as gender critical people, were concerned about. Right. So the no males in women's jails, and Amy's advocacies to protect women and children in safe spaces like, change rooms and rape crisis centers and women's shelters. And we learned through the hearings that Amy, as a psychiatric nurse, has spent time at basically street level, working in some of these housing environments where vulnerable women in the sex trade work. Right. So she has an investment and a history of being engaged in those communities. And then on Monday, we began the cross-examination with Barbara Findlay. And we got to the end of Monday. I don't know if you were tuned in at that point, Melanie.
Yes. Yes. I most certainly was.
Because Barbara Findlay was,
what a show trial. Let me just say, Barbara Findlay cross-examining Amy Hamm was quite the spectacle.
She was looking for, so while Lisa Bildy was allowing Amy to build this narrative, right, a really coherent story with proofs and references and all of this history of Amy's activism and her courageous outspokenness. And then when Barbara Findlay came on, she was looking to get like one-word answers. Her questions were disjointed. I believe what she was doing was she was trying to get a question with an answer that she could, decontextualize and sew together with a whole bunch.
Well, she was trying to get her to almost contradict herself in some ways, or to
try
to get Amy to say something that she could then say, "Aha, you are transphobic."
Of course.
Isn't it true that, for example, when she was talking about males and female, I think it was males and female toilets, and really trying to say, is it not true that they can have kidney disease, or is it not true that this is transphobic against them, or kind of going over and over and over the point. And Amy, what was brilliant about Amy was that she kept almost giving the exact same answer.
Well, it's the truth, right?
That this was not about trans people. That this was about protecting women and girls.
That's
and
right.
That was what she was doing. And I think at one point, even Barbara Findlay was like, "Look, I'm not asking you about your advocacy. I'm not asking you about your advocacy. I'm asking you about trans women." And she's like, "Well, but I'm an advocate for women." Anyway, I thought that was brilliant.
So her pinned tweet, which was my favorite tweets of hers this week, she was fairly quiet until after the hearings wrapped. Things I've testified under oath. Women don't have penises. Lesbians don't have penises. Males can't be lesbians. Males calling themselves lesbians are heterosexual men. Homosexuality is same-sex attraction. You cannot literally change your sex, and sex isn't assigned at birth.
Yeah.
Now, there's lots of confusing language here, and I'm just going to a little sidebar because I learned a new acronym this week. It was only a couple of years ago that I learned what AMAB and AFAB is. And for viewers who might not know, AMAB is assigned male at birth, and AFAB is assigned female at birth. And I was reading a policy piece, or reviewing one that's going up, and they've changed the acronym to OMAB and OFAB. Observed male at birth and observed female at birth. This is gender critical, people, right?
Is this?
And it's the argument: sex isn't assigned; it's observed, right? So it's the biological reality.
Well, it's ridiculous because it is ridiculous because so one of the things that Barbara Findlay kept doing is, as a queer activist, which is odd, kept confusing sex and gender, right? And I was actually Amy that kept bringing her back to, well, do you mean sex or do you mean gender? That happened several times. So she's confused. Barbara Findlay was confusing herself, which is kind of the point of people speaking out against this, right? So the whole point of assigned a sex at birth is saying that you can somehow change that sex. And trans activists for a long time have been saying, of course we can't change sex. It's just about gender, identity. And yet that's so evidently not true when you get into it. Again, back to the no debate, and that's why you don't want to debate. But
I was really wondering how Barbara Findlay was handling the issue of lesbians with penises. Barbara Findlay is a lesbian, and at one point she was sputtering. At the end of Monday, she was sputtering. She said, as you noted, that she was confused. She'd confused herself, and she was trying to play these games. At one point, she tried to get the panel to make a ruling that Amy had to refer to trans-identified men as trans women, because that's the proper terminology. And the panel came back. Lisa Bildy rightfully said, "Well, you're asking the panel to compel speech. And, you can't do that." The panel did come back and say, we are confused by the terminology. And we'd asked, to address or to call trans women as trans women. And then Amy just simply shifted to biological males and biological females.
brilliant.
Yeah. Solid testimony. Sadly, this isn't going to be over for her for 6 months or more. To give you kind of an example, last October, Barry Neufeld came to Ottawa for his Supreme Court review of his defamation case with the head of the BC Teachers Federation. So that was October. The decision came near the end of May the 19th. So it was a long process. Now, what's happening with the Hamm hearings is they're having a deadline in January where the first of the parties will put forward their written submissions. And then the other legal team will have 3 weeks to respond to it. And there's a bit of a game of tennis, from what I understand, going back and forth. And then they will schedule oral submissions. So there will be a day in the new year at some point where Bildy and Bastow, Amy's team, as well as Findlay and Seaborn?
Seaborn.
Michael Seaborn will make their, the traditional closing arguments in the legal case. And then the panel will deliberate and come up with their decision, which could take months to write up. I was left every single day wondering why the panel didn't return and say, look, this is ridiculous. We can't even bother continuing with this because the charges are so astounding. But, it's...
May I add?
Please.
Barbara Findlay cross-examined everyone else up until she finished cross-examining Amy Hamm.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that Barbara Findlay, her, was absolutely embarrassed by cross-examining Dr. Cantor last week.
Yep.
And I felt that Barbara Findlay was very embarrassed. Well, I don't know if she was personally embarrassed, but to me, it was embarrassing to watch her being destroyed by Amy Hamm. And then came two hard-hitting superstars in the gender critical world, and that is Kathleen Stock, who is I think it's a doctor of philosophy, and she's been speaking out about this for a long time. She was canceled, protested quite a lot. She continues to be protested, cancelled. Yeah, she's had a lot of issues in the UK for speaking out against biological reality. And Linda Blade, Coach Blade, also gave testimony. Neither one of those was cross-examined. The I don't know, prosecution, if you want to call them that, refused to cross-examine them.
Well,
and what testimony did they give?
Oh, Doc Stock was incredible. As a philosopher, a lot of what she testified to was the abuse of language and the change of language and how using gendered language, ideological gendered language, erases the ability to talk about things meaningfully. Like, you can't have homosexuality, gay or lesbian, if you adopt the gender language framework, because same-sex attraction ceases to exist. It becomes same gender attraction. She's very composed, and she's been through the cancellation that Amy is going through right now, right? So is it Essex or Sussex? I get them mixed up. I think it's Sussex.
I believe it's Sussex.
Okay.
Yes.
So she was hounded out of Sussex University in 2021 after a couple of years as a lesbian professor, intellectual. There were posters of her up on campus. There was graffiti in the washrooms. There was people stalking her and harassing her, and they were trying to use the complaints mechanisms within the university to have her investigated repeatedly. And one of the things she did share was that the UK has now liberalized conversation around this issue, where in 2021, they were just as oppressive about this as we currently are. So they're kind of like the canary in the coal mine for us, or a leading indicator of where we're going. And I as I was live tweeting, I'm like, okay, we're taking a break now, and we're going to have. I thought it was going to be Barbara Findlay to come back in cross-examination, and just like when Karen Bastow and Lisa Bildy traded off good cop, bad cop. Michael Seaborn sort of took over the final days of the hearing from Barbara Findlay, and completely surprising came back and said, we have no questions. And in a legal case, that is important, because it means that the testimony,
that's saying they don't want to embarrass themselves.
And
that, to me, that said, we can't do this because we're going to look bad.
And the testimony is accepted on its face, right? So like if you disagree with the testimony, you investigate it and you try and cross-examine it to take it apart. But if you don't cross-examine, it means you've accepted it.
Amy and Dr. Cantor realistically didn't say all that much different from what both Linda Blade and Kathleen Stock said, just from a slightly different perspective.
Right.
Yet they were the prosecution was very, very happy to cross-examine those two. So my perspective was that it was about, we can't touch this. Mm-hmm. We've been looking bad, and if we continue doing this, it's going to get worse. That was my interpretation.
Yeah. Now, I suspect what the lawyers for the college are going to argue, they're going to stress on Amy having identified herself as a nurse and a nurse educator while she was communicating about gender critical issues. And they're going to try and say that this makes a bad name for the profession.
So does that mean you can argue, you can't, they cannot argue against the facts, but they can say that you behaved unethically by talking about your politics as a nurse?
Right. And then I suspect what Bildy and Bastow will argue is that Amy's speech is legitimate. It's legitimate political speech. It's a fact-based, biological-based reality, and that it's in terms of our Constitution and our Charter rights, it's a freedom of expression that's important in the public sphere. They have, if they want to censor her and call it hate speech, they have to show that it shows no social purpose and has no social value, and it's impossible in this case. So, this is going to drag out.
It's immense social value. And just on that topic, Linda Blade, although was not cross-examined, we've already mentioned that, but Seaborn did try to eliminate Linda Blade's testimony altogether. Am I right in that?
Yep. They tried to disqualify it on relevance, and they were able to get parts of James Cantor's report removed for relevance, and a good part of Coach Blade's testimony removed on relevance. And the relevance argument, like I was saying, was to the fact, around the issue of Amy identifying herself as a nurse educator, even though it was her private life, and that this was, that's their argument that they're making. Those are the charges or the allegations made against her. And that this was a misconduct. So, Amy.
I just think it says a lot.
Yeah. Amy's a hero. He did an amazing job.
Yeah.
I'm connected with her on a couple social media platforms, one private, one, of course, Twitter. And it's clear that she's now speaking more.
Well, not only did she do an amazing job, but Amy Hamm is all of us. We are all Amy Hamm, as individual Canadians. So this case to me is about the ability to have an opinion that is not the opinion of the whatever decider. In this case, it's the College of BC Nurses who decides what opinion is and isn't allowed. So this is what if we take it to schools and stuff, we're teaching children that there is the correct way to think. We're not teaching them to think critically. Now, Amy Hamm thinks critically. She's a critically minded person who has come to this conclusion on her own and is expressing that opinion. That is not the opinion that has been decided as the correct opinion or the right side of history opinion, which is from the BC Nurses. But we're supposed to live in a country that is based on the freedom of expression, that is a free country based on, classical liberal values and all this stuff, democracy, et cetera, But this is why this case to me is so important, because if it's decided that Amy Hamm loses her license, well, what does that say about all of our ability to be able to have and formulate, for one, and express our own individual opinions? And these are opinions, right? So even if even if Amy Hamm said actually hateful things, which she did not, okay, she's talking about biological reality. But even if she had said things that were hateful, the last time I checked, having an emotion is not illegal. So to have a hateful opinion is not illegal.
Right.
And so to me, this is why Amy Hamm is all of us Canadians. We are all Amy Hamm, because what happens here really, I think, down the line sets a precedent for all of our ability to communicate our true feelings, our true opinions.
I really hope that this. So I mentioned I was on a call with a number of medical professionals and people, other people. Like, I'm in a regulated profession. I work in financial services. I have multiple licenses that I'm accountable for. Any one of my regulators could come after me the same way that a regulator went after Amy Hamm. And I've noticed that this past year when I did one of my renewals, that I didn't get the sign off on the DEI commitments. That it seemed like it had been rolled back. You're right about this. It affects many people. Jordan Peterson came up a couple of times. Barbara Findlay brought him up, and he's under similar types of persecution through his college, this mid-level bureaucracy, not official government, and it affects. Like, I'm in Ottawa. Our second biggest employer is technology sector, and we've got government, and both of those sectors are completely captured by this. You've got to walk on eggshells no matter where you are if you're going to talk about this in your personal or private life. And then you have all the professions, the accountants, the lawyers. Lisa Bildy, for those who don't know, was I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, the Ontario Law Society's bencher elections. She ran on what was called the Stop SOP. And the Stop SOP was a statement of principles. So the Law Society was forcing lawyers, and this is when I first came across Lisa Bildy and her fellow campaigner, Bruce Party, where they were talking about these DEI commitments that lawyers and law firms of a certain size had to commit to in writing. This diversity, basically, you have to sign on to the political belief system in order to keep your license. And
let's investigate that just for a second, because what lawyers, this is the thing, right? A lawyer is supposed to be the ultimate in critical thinker.
Right.
That is the whole point of being a legal professional.
Yeah.
And when you're asking lawyers to have a prescribed opinion, that is entirely, in my opinion, against the entire purpose of being a lawyer.
Yeah. As we're wrapping things up here, we're not as long as last week, but I wanted to plug the Lighthouse event that's coming up on December 4th in Toronto. So if you're watching from the GTA, and I'm coming along with a couple of other people from Ottawa for this event, Lighthouse Community Foundation, the Lighthouse Network has been gathering and growing over the last several years of critical thinkers and activists. I would call it an activist incubator, an anti-woke organization where we've had the chance to meet lots and lots of people working on different significant issues. And Lighthouse just took a more formal step. It's become a nonprofit organization, or started a nonprofit arm. And their first event is December the 4th in Toronto. It's hosted by Jonathan Kay, who is the Canadian editor of Quillette magazine. He's a writer who's been writing National Post for decades. His mom is Barbara Kay. And the three speakers: Megan Murphy, gender critical activist, originally from Vancouver, a Canadian, now lives in the States; Bruce Party; and Trish Wood. And you can get tickets for that online at lighthouseforum.ca. And it'd be great to make this event a tremendous success. When I signed up, it gave the option to make a donation to help get the Lighthouse Foundation online. And I've been telling the crew there, like, it shouldn't be hard to get people to give $50 or $100 a month who are members of this organization. We pay that for gym memberships easily, or phone plans, or that sort of thing. So I made an initial contribution to the foundation. I'm looking forward to. I met John Kay and Bruce Party a number of times. Looking forward to meeting Megan Murphy and a bunch of our fellow gender critical warriors and free speech advocates.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be there too. I forgot. I think it's great to mention that. Good call. Yeah, really great call. Lighthouse is a really great place to meet other people who also believe in the ability to think critically. Because I can certainly say that not everybody in Lighthouse agrees with every single thing all the time.
No,
so it really is a place where people can
good, robust debates, and that's all in collegial. Respect.
Well, it's in the interest of actually being able to have an opinion and to express differences of opinion. And, sometimes it gets a little bit heated. Sometimes people agree, sometimes they don't. But it's a really good organization to support. You're absolutely right. And I think that I would like to see it grow. I'd like more and more people to sign up to Lighthouse, or maybe even start creating their own free speech and classical liberal groups to be able to share these ideas and not always necessarily share the exact same opinion, which is great. Mm-hmm. So yeah, really good call on bringing that up.
One other bit of news for anyone involved in a parents organization across Canada. Early in December, we haven't set the date yet, and we want to make it accessible to people from coast to coast based on time zones. There is going to be a general meeting of the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada. Open invitation to participate. If you're involved in that, you can contact me via Twitter or other platforms for more info on it. And we are going to be debuting, we're going to get somebody from Canadian Gender Report to give a presentation about the school gender policy that they have developed. So with the psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors, people familiar with the issue of gender in education. There's someone working on a PhD in education policy and pedagogy who's involved in this organization now. So we're going to be discussing, getting a presentation on that, and bringing together, formally announcing our statement of principles and what we'll be aiming to do as the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada. It's exciting.
Will that be online?
Yeah, we'll do it as a virtual, and we're hammering out some more details on that this week and getting our speakers lined up. So it'll be a virtual speaking event, and we invite people to participate and sign on to the principles of the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada. And we're exploring best practices and sharing stories. Next week on the Canadian Gender Wars Report, I'm going to have my interview with Emily Duggan, who is from Moms Against the Norm. We had a short conversation earlier today, and because of time and all the stuff that's going on, we're not going to fit it into this week's Canadian Gender Wars Report, but we'll cover it next week.
But if you wish to get to know Emily a little bit better, I happen to have had a long-form discussion with her this week. She's currently my current episode on the Resilience podcast channel. So yeah, you're welcome to go have a little preview there. But her, Shannon and Emily will be discussing something a little bit different next week. So that's what I'm going to end on today.
Awesome. Looking forward to all the new news coming out as we follow the gender wars in the coming week.